Shelley Michael was a cheerleader, and husband Jimmy, her handsome jock. Theirs was a winning matchup.
Shelley initiated some kind of cheerleading move with Jimmy. She'd jump up and land in his arms.
But in the game of love, not everyone plays by the rules. And a contest between rivals will end in sudden death.
We were able to identify the head and then work our way down, and we were able to see that you had a body on the bed.
And later, from the day they met, Scott and Lisa Pattison were the picture of health and happiness.
Physically, they were a gorgeous couple. Scott was a bodybuilder. Lisa was always the prettiest girl.
But playing with someone's heart is a dangerous game. And not everyone plays fair.
If somebody were forcing this bar on your neck, there's no way that you could be breathing after 45 seconds.
When it comes to romance, 2 is company, 3's a crowd, and 1 is a killer. People would have you think that love is all sonnets and songbirds. But for me, love has always been a full contact sport. Why, even the most romantic love affairs are full of blood, sweat, and tears. Temptation first led Shelley Angus and Jimmy Michael to stray out of bounds. But when it comes to love, old habits are hard to shake. Some things just feel like they're meant to be. When respiratory therapist Jimmy Michael meets energetic nurse Michelle Angus in 1998, she's a breath of fresh air.
Jimmy had always had a thing about cheerleaders. And that was his ultimate woman. So to find Shelley working there at the hospital and find out she was a cheerleader, he must have thought that he found heaven.
The former high school cheerleader can still turn heads with her prom queen smile.
You guys ready?
Shelley loved to be the center of attention. She would play to the gallery with everything she did.
Okay.
She'd jump up and land in Jimmy's arms to the applause of the other members of staff.
Yes.
As the 2 co-workers make late-night rounds at the hospital, sparks begin to fly. But there's just one small problem. They're both already married.
Jimmy and Shelley were both dealing with failed marriages. And when you talk to somebody about your problems and they're having the same problems, I think it bonds you together.
Some things simply can't get in the way of true love. Like wedding vows.
I think Jimmy did really fall in love with her.
In 1999, Jimmy and Shelley make a fateful decision to leave their spouses and run away together. And by the following spring, they're married.
Jimmy and Shelley both had 2 children each, a boy and a girl.
So cute.
So she would dress the kids up in one uniforms, they all matched. And she had a personalized license plate which said 6-pack. She was just trying to create this idea of the perfect American family.
Shelley was definitely a person that liked to be in charge. and Jimmy was okay with letting her have that role. She definitely wanted to run the household. Jimmy and Shelley moved to a house located in Suncrest, and that's a nice neighborhood around Morgantown. It's located right there. You're close to everything. Big brick house, very nice, corner lot. Just seemed to be like a great location for them and ideal for their family.
All right, let's go. Come on.
And the newlyweds are right in their element, reliving their glory days as high school heroes.
Jimmy coached the football team that his son played on.
You guys did great.
Okay. 5, 6, 7, 8. Woo!
Shelley loved cheerleading. She still did backflips at age 32, and she coached the girls.
While we might not get to stay young forever, Shelley and Jimmy feel lucky to have a second chance at love.
At first, I admired them and how well they blended their family together. But as time went on, you knew it wasn't the perfect family.
4 years into their marriage, finances push romance to the sidelines when Jimmy decides to launch his own medical supply business.
He had done his research and he knew that it was going to be hard and it would be a struggle, but he said, I know my family will be better off in the long run.
But Shelley doesn't want to tighten her designer belt.
Shelley would never cut herself off from spending. You know, she always had the best designer clothes, the best of everything, and I don't think she worried too much about whether Jimmy could afford it or not.
No.
Well, sometimes a girl likes to look her best, even if it is a formula for disaster.
There was a lot of stress between Jimmy and Shelley. There was no smiles, no loving looks anymore. So I knew their marriage must be in trouble.
The passion that had once driven these go-getters together is starting to fade.
Jimmy told one of his friends that things weren't going well. His wife wouldn't sleep with him, and people could tell he was getting more and more keyed up.
Looks like these soulmates need someone to lift their spirits.
All right, girls.
And that's what friends are for, after all. Especially the handsome ones.
During the fall, when football season started, we met Bobby and Kelly. Kelly was a good friend of Shelley's. Her daughter cheered, and Bobby helped Jimmy coach.
They started taking each other's children to school and became very, very close. The four of them became best friends, inseparable.
And when Bobby runs into money trouble, Coach Jimmy is the first to offer a helping hand.
Bobby got laid off, so Jimmy offered him a job out of the goodness of his heart.
Cheers, man. Cheers.
And Bobby was only too pleased.
Even Shelley is eager to help Bobby get back on his feet.
The four of them were having dinner one night over a couple of drinks, and Bobby happened to mention that somebody he knew was selling an embroidery machine that made uniforms.
Check this out.
Shelley saw an embroidery company as a way to, not have to go to work every day, to stay at home and do her own things.
Shelley jumps at the chance to partner up with Bobby and together launch a side business out of her home.
Shelley never really wanted to work too much, and she certainly didn't want to work a 40-hour week like anyone else.
But a little more free time might not be the only thing Shelley is after.
Shelley got online and did some research and found out that there was going to be a seminar about how to set up your own embroidery business in Chicago. So Jimmy put up the money for the trip, and Shelley booked her and Bobby into a one-room suite in a hotel.
If history serves, Shelley has plenty to teach the coach about the X's and O's of a secret affair.
I know people that seen him at the football field and said, you know, there's something going on between those two.
Two coaches with a cheerleader atop the pyramid. Looks like a love triangle to me.
During one of our conversations when Jimmy was talking about the embroidery business, he said that Shelley was going to Chicago on a convention with this Bobby.
They both bought bathing suits. Although it was a business meeting, I guess they were looking for some R&R. Shelley started coming on to him, was being very flirtatious.
Looks like this trip quickly moved from business to pleasure.
And they ended up in bed.
A coach is used to sharing everything with his assistant. But I doubt Coach Jimmy was expecting to be sharing his wife.
When they got back from the trip, they both decided just to kind of keep cool, because they both didn't want their respective partners to find out what had happened.
But the affair gets a second wind a week later, when Jimmy goes away on a hunting trip.
Donuts. On Saturday morning, Bobby came over with some Krispy Kremes for Shelley. Bobby's daughter had been spending the night at Shelley's place with a sleepover with her daughter. And they went straight up to Jimmy's bedroom and ended up making love for a couple of hours while their respective daughters would sleep.
Now that's what I call a morning workout.
That night when Jimmy came back from hunting deer, the four of them, that's Jimmy, Shelley, and Bobby and Kelly, went out together.
Hey.
If Jimmy only knew what was going on, his trophy deer might not be the only head he'd want to mount on the wall.
I do think he suspected something was going on between Shelley and Bobby.
It seems this social butterfly is flying a bit too close to the flame. A mere 3 days later, things at the Michael home would turn positively explosive.
November 29th, 2005, Shelley gets up early. She kissed Jimmy goodbye because he was still in bed, and then she drove to the hospital. Then around 10:30, she gets a call that the house is on fire, and she tells everyone she has to go and runs out of the hospital.
Shelley arrives home to discover a chaotic scene.
It was just a ton of people. The fire seemed isolated to one particular corner of the house, which appeared to me to be on the second floor.
As firefighters reach the heart of the blaze, they make a horrifying discovery.
Once they ventilated the house a little bit better and they could kind of see what was going on, they confirmed that there was a body lying on the bed in the master bedroom.
Lying in the burned-out remains of his home, 33-year-old Jimmy Michael is dead.
I think a way to describe it would be that he had basically burned into the box springs. Everything was kind of one. Everything had melted together.
Jimmy's friends and family rush to the scene when they hear the news.
Shelley said she didn't know what happened. My husband said to her, "Shelley, thank you for loving my son." And she said, "I wish I could have loved him more." And we just thought that was strange.
When I went up to Shelley, I sat down beside her, and before I could say anything, she said to me, "Did you get that outfit at B. Moss?" It was so off the wall, and I was trying to process, what's going on here.
It's the question on everyone's mind as signs immediately point to something beyond a routine fatal fire.
In a fire, especially a fire that burns hot, the muscles contract, and it causes the extremities, the arms and legs, to curl. But in this particular case, it appeared that Mr. Michael was asleep. And this was a very good indicator that something unusual happened in the fire.
And when the medical examiner weighs in, the detective's suspicions are confirmed.
From the autopsy, we learned that the fire was started after Jimmy Michaels was deceased, which immediately now turns this into a murder investigation.
And there's another surprise in store for investigators.
The lab had found the presence of a paralytic in Jimmy Michaels' blood called rocuronium, and the levels were high enough that this drug would have been fatal and would have killed Mr. Michael.
Rocuronium is a very, very strong muscle paralyzer. It's also used as lethal injection for prisoners.
Once injected, it would have taken Jimmy more than 10 agonizing minutes to die.
It's probably the worst death I could imagine. You're completely conscious and you see and you can hear everything. One by one, all your muscles will close down until finally you're helplessly trapped in your own body. You can't fight it. Your body's a prison.
As the investigation into Jimmy's murder picks up, his friends are surprised to see just how much Bobby is comforting the grieving widow.
Shelley took Bobby with her to make arrangements for a memorial service for Jimmy in Morgantown.
It's certainly nice that you have a support system.
And while they were talking to the pastor, Bobby and Shelley were holding hands, and the pastor was very alarmed. He thought there was something wrong. Eventually he wrote to the police and said, they seem more like lovers than friends.
It appears the assistant is eager to take the reins from his old coach. But the question is, who is calling the plays?
During interviews with family and friends, we learned of a conference in Chicago that Bobby and Shelley traveled to 2 weeks before the murder.
And it's only a matter of time before the police break up this little game of two-hand touch.
It made them think this could be the motive for Jimmy's murder. Is the wife having a hot affair with the husband's best friend and employee. That was definitely cause for suspicion.
The investigation into the arson and murder of local Morgantown businessman Jimmy Michael in his home is heating up.
Jimmy was dead before the fire had even been started, and he'd not died in the fire.
Detectives have learned of the affair between Jimmy's wife Shelley and his best friend and employee Bobby Jordan. But they're not doing a victory dance just yet.
They brought them both in at the same morning to question them, and they made sure that Bobby and Shelley saw each other in the waiting room before they were called into respective interviews. It was decided to interview Bobby first.
Bobby Jordan.
But Coach Bobby doesn't put up much of a defense.
Within a couple of minutes, Bobby had broken down like a little child. He was weeping and sobbing and admitting the affair and coming clean.
After several rounds of questioning, police find no evidence that Bobby had any hand in his friend's death.
Bobby had a very solid alibi. He was seen by the office manager at Jimmy's medical company. His alibi was very, very corroborated, and we didn't have any issues with the story that he gave us.
But that still leaves one other player on the field.
Shelley Michael.
When police question Shelley, little does she realize that her lover has been working from a different playbook.
Have you ever had an affair with him?
No.
Why do you think Bobby would say that? He's had sex with you. He's had an affair with you.
I have no idea.
We talked about the affair, and she denied it.
I have no idea why I would say that.
100 times. She denied it. Never had an affair. So we get the receipt from the hotel, we get the pictures, we get Bobby's statement, we put them in front of her, and then she says, well, I just don't want you to think I'm a bad person.
Well, it's a little too late for that. And investigators have a hunch of Shelley's true motive for killing her husband.
Recently, Jimmy had taken out a $500,000 life insurance policy, and she was the sole beneficiary.
Not to mention, this is one person who knows the deadly effects of rocuronium.
Shelley used rocuronium daily for operations. She was on the ICU, so it was freely available on her floor.
But there is still one thing stumping investigators. On the morning of the blaze, Shelley reported to work at the hospital.
During my first conversation with Michelle Michael, she tells me I never left the hospital after I got there sometime after 6 o'clock that morning.
You're at the hospital by what time?
I think I was there by 6:10 or 6:15.
Did you go by her house?
I didn't leave the hospital.
But after a quick timeout, officials get a little help from instant replay.
We were able to go back to the hospital to document through video what time she arrived, which was sometime after 6 o'clock that morning. And then sometime after 8 o'clock, we watch her exit the hospital. And then 17 minutes later, she arrives back. We have 17 minutes of her day once she leaves the property that we can't account for.
So was that really enough time for Shelley to have driven home, lit the fatal fire, and returned to work as if nothing happened?
A detective in the squad went out several times and timed the route. No matter what time of the day he drove the route, did it ever take him anywhere near 17 minutes to do this?
With seconds left on the clock, it's game over for Shelley Michael.
We had a very strong case against Shelley, and that led to the warrant being issued and her being arrested.
On March 10th, 2006, Shelley Michael is arrested for Jimmy's murder. What really happened that fateful November morning may never fully be known. But prosecutors have their ideas.
Well, prosecutors believe that Shelley killed Jimmy Michael sometime between 11:30 Sunday night and 5:30 Monday morning. She was a nurse, so it would have been very easy for her to grab the syringe and fill it with rocuronium and inject Jimmy, and if he felt anything, it would have been like a little mosquito bite. Then for the next 11 or so minutes, who knows what Shelley was doing? Was she talking to him? Was she taunting him? Was she telling him what she was going to do with his money? Nobody will ever know. Then just before she leaves, she turns on the iron, leaves it on, hoping it's going to set the whole place on fire and get rid of the evidence. Then she leaves.
But unlike Shelley's other bad ideas, this one doesn't quite catch fire.
Well, Shelley's working on her pediatrics floor. She's looking at her watch the whole time, expecting somebody to come in and give her the news that her house is on fire. But nothing happens. By around 8 o'clock or so, she thinks that she's better sneak back home and reset the fire. Detectives believe she probably used an exhilarant to pour it over Jimmy and the bed.
Secrets and lies can fan the flames of passion. But it takes pure evil to light that match. On July 20th, 2007, Shelley is convicted of the first-degree murder of Jimmy Michael and sentenced to life in prison.
A mother's love never changes for her children. It never fades. People say you get over things. You never get over it. You just learn how to live with it. My life has changed forever.
Well, I think Shelley saw her and Jimmy and the 4 children as being the all-American family. They were both coaches for their respective football and cheerleading teams. They did everything right. I think that she felt that police would never suspect her of killing her husband in such a way.
When it comes to a healthy marriage, it's important to exercise some caution. After all, affairs can be such a workout.
Great set, Miss Lucci.
And you can never underestimate the benefit of a good partner. But just remember, every man has his weaknesses, no matter how sizable he may appear.
10 years.
And some people have to learn the hard way that an unfit lover can be very harmful to your health. Our next story takes place in northern Indiana, but unlike those endless uniform rows of corn, love comes calling in all shapes and sizes. For Lisa Young, true love arrived in the form of a healthy baby boy in July of 1991.
Lisa was in her first years of college. She was 19 when she had her son, and she not only went to school, but she also held down a job.
But even though Lisa excels as a single mom, she still can't help but wish there was a dad in the picture.
She wanted a father figure for her son. She wanted a family that they could all be part of.
And sometimes when you make a wish, fate finds a way to come calling. After all, baby shouldn't be the only reason a woman is kept up all night.
Lisa and her sister went up to Fort Wayne, kind of a girls' night out, and decided they wanted to just kind of, hit the town.
Lisa was always the prettiest girl. No matter where we went, people were attracted to her, and they would always come over and talk to her.
Sometimes all it takes is a few drinks and some dark lighting to kickstart a romance.
Scott Patterson took a lot of pride in how he looked. He was a bodybuilder, definitely one of these guys that wanted to dress and look his absolute best.
And sure enough, he did come over to our table. He gave her a card, and it said, Jean-Claude Van Damme look-alike. And I kind of rolled my eyes and said, you're not gonna call this guy, are you?
Hey, sometimes even a good girl just can't resist a really bad line.
What was cute about them together was they kind of offset each other. She was very kind of quiet and reserved, and he would be silly, and he would tell jokes and, crack the ice.
In the months that follow, it doesn't take much heavy lifting for this muscle man to sweep Lisa Young off her feet.
From Lisa's standpoint, it did seem like a complete package. He had a job, he was very nice, and to her, you couldn't get a better combination, especially when you're a single mother, to try to form a family.
Within a year, all of Lisa's dreams come true when she and Scott wed in a fairy tale ceremony in August of 1996.
Lisa rode in on a white carriage with a horse. Her dress was beautiful. She had a smile on her face the whole time. Things were kind of falling into place, what I think she had envisioned after she got married.
Lisa settled in as a marketing manager for the mall, and Scott was doing a lot of construction and eventually started his own company.
And while other wives watch their husbands grow soft, Lisa has a man who isn't afraid to break a sweat.
For Scott, his physical image and his body image was everything. They had a tanning bed, they had a workbench, they had a stair stepper. It was very important for him to be in shape. He was a very nice looking man. Very, very nice looking man. And Lisa was very taken by him.
Life together for the new family looks happy, at least for a little while. But by 2007, after a decade of marriage, it seems that Scott and his ego could use a bit more stroking. And he soon bumps into just the person to pump him up.
Scott was working on a construction project and he needed a permit. And as he was in the city building, he happened to see Stacy, this nice, bubbly young blonde, and recognized that he knew her from the past.
Stacy?
Scott and Stacy had a past, all right.
Stacy and Scott actually met out of high school and had a relationship for a couple years and kind of went their separate ways.
But But sometimes all it takes is a little breezy flirtation to restoke the flames of passion.
Even though Scott and Stacy found out they were both married to other people, they still decided that they wanted to catch up over a lunch. And boy, that was the beginning of the end.
That's the tricky thing about old flames. They can still carry quite the spark.
Stacy just kind of liked the way Scott treated her. The honeymoon was over for her and her husband, and here comes a guy showing her a lot of attention.
This is one chance reunion that's about to turn deadly, and the return of an old flame will snuff out one life forever.
The case actually went from being just a simple accident to a potential homicide.
10 years after their fairy tale wedding, Scott and Lisa Pattison are no longer the picture of health and happiness. Lately, this bodybuilder has been exercising his wandering eye. And it seems an affair with old flame Stacy Kennedy is just what he needs to pump up his ego.
Scott and Stacy kind of hit it off, and they began sneaking around. In Marion, it became a little bit of the talk of the town. As a married man and as a married woman, Scott and Stacy didn't try to hide a whole lot.
It's not long before Scott's savvy wife gets wind of his sexy affair. And soon, she has all the proof she needs.
She calls me up and tells me that she had put a tracking device on the computer and she had pulled up all the emails between Stacy and Scott. And she had read them all and that she knows everything.
We've been married 10 years. 10 years of my life.
When Lisa finally confronts Scott with the evidence, he pleads guilty and promises to end the affair for good.
What is this?
After the confrontation, I think that, Scott was on maybe his best behavior for a little bit.
Hey, I'm sorry.
But not for too long.
What's wrong with you?
The lure of forbidden love proves too strong for this muscle man.
Scott was still pursuing Stacy when he was telling Lisa that he was repairing their marriage and their marriage was going to work.
As for Stacy, well, she just can't seem to get enough heat from this old flame. And soon the affair is reignited. And as the months drag on, the affair intensifies.
Lisa may have been quiet. She may have been very reserved, but Lisa was no fool.
Scott was more remote, physically not wanting to have a relationship with Lisa.
I really need to talk about this.
And Lisa was worrying about, was the affair back on?
But before Lisa can call another time out on her husband and his girlfriend, Scott calls for a divorce.
Scott informed Lisa that he wanted a divorce, and his reasoning was that it just wasn't working out.
No, I'm done. Just nothing to talk about.
Everything that Lisa had worked for, being part of her community, her church, raising her son, I think she could see that all of that was not going to be anymore because of this affair.
Lisa had been on her own before. Now she must decide, was she ready to do it again?
I told her I would support her, whether she decided to stay with him or she decided to leave.
But what happens next, nobody sees coming. At 12:15 p.m. on July 2nd, 2009, 911 operators in Wabash, Indiana receive a frantic call.
911, which emergency?
Yes, my wife has had an accident at home, and she's in the back of my truck, and she's not breathing, nothing.
The 911 operator asked Scott if he wanted to pull over and have somebody meet him there so they could perform CPR on Lisa. And he declined that, saying that he is an ex-first responder and that he'd already done that and it wasn't working. He just needed to get to the hospital.
I need an escort or something to get to the hospital quicker.
What kind of truck are you in, Scott?
I am in a blue pickup truck.
The ambulance intercepted Scott and put Lisa in the ambulance and took her to the hospital.
As Scott talks to police, he relays an alarming series of events.
When spoken to by officers, Scott indicated that he had been working on a job site earlier in the morning. He came home around lunchtime, heard music in the basement, and then he found Lisa there on the weight bench with the barbell across her throat.
What looked like happened to Lisa was she was home alone, lifting weights. She mishandled the bar, and it just came down on her neck. When Lisa got to the hospital, there was just nothing they could do.
At 12:49 p.m., 36-year-old Lisa Patterson is pronounced dead.
Her son was the person that called me, and I picked up the phone, and he said, "Aunt Chris," and I could tell in his voice that something was wrong.
The one person Lisa's son had depended on his whole life was gone.
I just dropped the phone, I screamed. It just didn't make sense to me.
News of Lisa's unusual accident quickly spreads, and so does the suspicion.
I wanted to tell everyone that walked into the funeral home she wouldn't be on that bench. I never, ever, ever knew her to lift weights.
And when investigators take a closer look at Lisa's injuries, they begin to have doubts of their own.
Her neck was not crushed. There were no bones that were crushed. The medical examiner that did the autopsy came to the conclusion that she died from slow asphyxiation, which made the investigators think, okay, this wasn't a bar coming down on her throat like a guillotine would. It would be someone forcing that on her neck.
But who would have enough muscle to exert such a deadly force? Police have one big man in mind. And when they bring Scott in for questioning, he readily admits that things at home weren't exactly ideal.
How is your relationship with Lisa? Is there ever a perfect marriage?
But according to Scott, his divorce from Lisa had officially been called off.
Scott indicated that he was no longer having an affair with Stacy and that his focus now was back on the marriage.
When police turn their attention to his whereabouts the day of Lisa's murder, Scott offers up an alibi.
On the morning of July 2nd, Scott went out to a job site and said that he was at the job site all morning until about 11:30.
But that still leaves one side of this deadly love triangle unaccounted for. Scott's girlfriend, Stacy Kennedy. And as investigators begin to dig up the dirt on their affair, they make a shocking discovery.
As the investigators were checking Scott's alibi for that morning, they also did some investigation into phone records and found out that he had made over 130 text messages to Stacy on the day of the murder.
Scott's picture of a marriage on the mend is suddenly looking a little ripped.
If Scott Pattison was lying about this affair with Stacy and it was still going on, possibly because of all these text messages, he could be lying about all kinds of other things.
Investigators begin to wonder whether there are one too many players on this field.
If you're trying to reconcile a relationship with Lisa, why would you text message over 130 times your former mistress?
Perhaps Lisa's killer didn't act alone. Maybe this killer had a spotter.
What was Scott telling her on the phone? What were some of those text messages that were going back and forth?
In Marion, Indiana, Scott Pattison has found his wife Lisa dead in their home gym with a barbell across her throat. But police insist this was no freak accident. Now Scott's affair with lover Stacy Kennedy and his odd behavior the day of Lisa's murder is raising eyebrows and suspicion.
Why don't you let me start an ambulance towards you, sir, if she needs CPR?
I've tried CPR. I'm an ex-first responder. I've tried this.
Looking back at the 911 call, why would a former first responder, someone who's trained in CPR, discontinue CPR?
And that's not the only thing Scott did that wasn't exactly standard protocol.
One of the biggest red flag texts that came during the investigation of that morning was that he actually texted Stacy as he was driving Lisa to the hospital.
And the text was downright chilling.
He texted Stacy 911.
It's hard to believe that anyone could be that cold. He has no respect for anything except for what he needs and his wants.
Police are starting to have an idea who was the muscle behind Lisa's murder. But now they wonder, who was the brains?
During the investigations, Stacy was looked at as potentially as having some involvement. However, when Stacy was contacted at the time of Lisa's death, she was actually out of state with her husband on a vacation.
Stacy is officially cleared. But police are far from done poking holes in Scott's story. Lucky for them, they're about to get a call that will blow it wide open.
When the investigators first got to the house, they found that there was a home security system, and they looked in the DVD tray, and there was nothing in it. Well, then when this call came from the home security company, they told the sheriff's department, hey, you're not looking for a DVD. This thing has a hard drive. And I think what you find on the hard drive is exactly what you're going to want.
And unfortunately for Scott, unlike cheating husbands, pictures don't lie.
The evidence was clear that Scott was there at the time of Lisa's death. When our officers looked at the tape, they couldn't believe their eyes because they saw Scott there and they said, we got him.
When investigators took a look at this video, they found that Scott Pattison had gone in and out of the home at least 2 or 3 times, and he had changed clothes. T-shirts and shorts on. I'm thinking maybe you're working out.
And maybe that's when he got a certain partner to join him.
I believe he talked Lisa into doing a little exercise. He'd spot her. He was going to help her. And he got her in a position that was vulnerable. It wasn't very hard for him to do.
In September 2008, Scott Patterson is charged with murder.
Everything you say, Scott?
I'm not guilty.
Throughout the trial, he maintains his innocence, even as the evidence mounts against him.
I think there are two reasons that Scott Patterson murdered Lisa. One of them, he was a very greedy individual and did not want to lose half of anything in the divorce. Also, there might have been some life insurance money coming his way as well.
But even from beyond the grave, savvy Lisa outsmarts her cheating husband one last time. In the weeks before her death, Lisa had secretly made moves to amend her life insurance policy to benefit just one person, her only true love, her son.
She was trying to make a life after this horrible life that she was living and try to make it better for her and for her son. I want to say, go Lisa. I mean, I'm proud of her.
And that's not the only surprise in store for Scott. The prosecution offers Stacey Kennedy full immunity to testify. And Scott loses the support of the last person who loved him.
The biggest thing that we thought was interesting was they asked her if she still loved him. And the answer was no. And you should have seen Scott's face when she said that.
On November 9th, 2010, a jury finds Scott Patterson guilty of murder, and he's sentenced to 60 years in prison. Plenty of time for Scott to spend in a cell with his favorite person of all.
Scott Patterson is a very self-centered, egotistical, arrogant, and narcissistic individual. I personally think that the jury got this right.
I hate Scott for taking Lisa away, and especially Lisa away from her son. I think there were different avenues that he could have went, but money and greed and sex and women, you know, that's his path that he chose.
They say the heart is the strongest muscle in the body, but I can assure you, if love turns to betrayal, it's also the most vulnerable. But if justice is served, it's only a matter of time before an unfit lover feels the burn of defeat.